It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, live from Qatar, where a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas has finally been done. The promise of an end to 15 months of suffering from Sunday brings people onto the streets of Gaza to celebrate. The agreement to return hostages, free prisoners and steadily withdraw Israel's forces is welcomed here in the city where the agreement was made.
We are committed. We will continue to do everything we can, everything possible, together with our partners to ensure that this deal is implemented.
President Biden says the deal will see an eventual end to the war, but tonight Israel's Prime Minister appears to give most of the credit to the man who will replace him, Donald Trump. The challenge to turn the corner on the conflict started as Hamas fighters crossed the border to kidnap and kill, as the group tonight says Israel has failed.
Also on Sky News at 10 tonight, the shot in the arm for the government's hopes for the economy, with a double dose of positive news on inflation from the UK and US. We see the intimidation on the streets of Mozambique as its new president is sworn in, despite popular doubts about his election. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight.
Good evening from Doha. After more than 15 months of fighting, Israel and Hamas agreed a ceasefire here today to end, at least for now, the war in Gaza. It will begin on Sunday and see Israeli hostages steadily released and Palestinian prisoners walk free from Israeli jails. Qatar has mediated the talks between the two sides, and the country's Prime Minister told me momentum for a deal started to build again in the last month. Let's just have a look at what this deal is. The ceasefire deal is thought to be broken down into three phases. The first, a 6-week initial ceasefire and a gradual Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. The second and third set to be negotiated and finalized further. So, into the first phase, 33 Israeli hostages are set to be released, with at least 3 hostages freed every week in that period. Hamas will release female hostages and under-19s first, followed by men over 50. That's in exchange for the release of around 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. Israel will also release all Palestinian women and children under 19 detained since October 7th, 2023, by an end of the first phase. 600 truckloads of humanitarian aid will be followed into Gaza every day of the ceasefire. If it's agreed and phase 2 begins, all the remaining Israeli hostages will be released. It'll also see more Palestinian prisoners freed in exchange. If negotiations endure, then phase 3 will see the bodies of hostages returned to Israel. The final phase will also see a 3 to 5 year reconstruction plan for Gaza, watched over by the UN, Egypt and Qatar. In a moment, we'll remember the stories of some of those for whom the ceasefire will come too late. But first, our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle has this report.
Finally, after 467 days of war, a ceasefire has been agreed between Israel and Hamas. Within minutes of the news breaking, there were celebrations across Gaza. They were dancing in the streets of Khan Yunis, a city that has been almost totally flattened over the many months of fighting.
All citizens feel relieved and happy with the news of the ceasefire, and we hope to return to our homes, villages and cities as soon as possible.
We have been waiting for this happiness for a year and a half. No one can feel the feeling that we are experiencing now. An indescribable feeling.
In Tel Aviv, where weekly demonstrations calling for a deal had brought the streets to a standstill, they lit candles tonight and finally started to hope that their relatives would be coming home soon. And in Doha, where the negotiations have been taking place, the Qatari Prime Minister said that they will work to make sure that the deal sticks.
We are committed. We will continue to do everything we can, everything possible, together with our partners to ensure that this deal is implemented as it's agreed. And this deal will bring us peace, hopefully, at the end of it. I believe that it all depends on the parties of the agreement and acting in good faith in that agreement in order to ensure that no collapse happening to that deal.
And in Washington, it was welcomed by the outgoing US President Joe Biden, whose officials have spent so many hours and days to reach this moment.
There was no other way for this war to end than with a hostage deal. And I'm deeply satisfied this day has finally come, for the sake of the people of Israel and the families waiting in agony, and for the sake of the innocent people in Gaza who suffered unimaginable devastation because of the war. The Palestinian people have gone through hell. Too many innocent people have died. Too many communities have been destroyed. In this deal, the people of Gaza can finally recover and rebuild. They can look to a future without Hamas in power.
The deal will need to be ratified by Israel's Security Cabinet on Thursday. It is expected to be approved. Many in Israel are against the deal because it doesn't guarantee the release of all the hostages in the first phase, and because Hamas is not defeated in Gaza.
Today we affirm that the occupation has failed to defeat our people and our resistance. They achieved nothing but destruction, massacres and war crimes against our people. They could not take their captives by force. They could only get them back through a negotiated deal with the resistance in exchange for a ceasefire and a dignified prisoner swap.
Even as the negotiations were continuing in Doha, the fighting carried on in Gaza. This was an airstrike early on Wednesday morning. The ceasefire will come into force this Sunday. The coming days will be a mix of anticipation and tension as both sides try to make final military gains whilst their citizens count down the hours to peace. But after so many months, so many thousands dead, and so many failed attempts to end the war, there is now an end in sight.
And Ali joins us live now from Jerusalem. And Ali, as you say, I mean, so many people will be holding their breath to wait and see what happens between now and Sunday, because frankly, anything is still possible.
It is. I'm in Jerusalem. It is a divided city, but tonight it has been united in celebration, but celebration for two different reasons. In East Jerusalem, Palestinians celebrating what they hope is an end to the fighting that has killed almost 47,000 of their own people in Gaza. In West Jerusalem, Israelis celebrating the moment when they might start receiving their hostages home. The last 15 and a half months for them, with so many hostages in Gaza, have been agonizing, and that has prevented them from being able to move on from the horrors of October the 7th. That moment of a ceasefire coming into force, that moment of the guns falling silent, is 3 days away. It feels very close, but it'll be a long 3 days. Already tonight there have been more airstrikes in Gaza, and I'd expect there to be more fighting over the coming days, as I said in my report, as both sides try and make military gains. And there is still a political process here to be gone through in Israel when the Israeli cabinet meets, and we're yet to hear publicly from Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But this has been an effort many, many months in the making. It has been thwarted various times along the way. The mediators have blamed both sides variously for negotiating in ways that have meant that a deal was not achievable. But through a multitude of different factors, a changing region, a new US president, and the fact that after so many months of fighting, both sides feel that now is the time to reach a deal, we are now on the cusp of a Gaza ceasefire.
Ali, thank you so much for bringing us up to date. Well, as we heard there in Ali's report from Qatar's Prime Minister, and earlier at that same news conference, I asked him whether the prospect of a new Trump presidency had helped make the deal happen. Have a listen.
Congratulations. This is a huge moment. You, as you say, have been working on this deal for many months. And the question is, why now? Why this moment? And was it pressure from the incoming Trump administration that got it over the line? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Hilda, for this question. Actually, we've been raising the question of the right moment for the entire period since the collapse of the first phase. But we have seen a momentum that started to build in the last month, and we kept pushing for that, working together very closely with our partners. And I can say that what we have seen from the U.S. in the past few days, seeing a collaboration transcending both administrations, was a clear demonstration for the commitment of the U.S. to reach to that deal. And I really would like to thank both the envoys who are here with us in the last couple of days, and they played a vital role in reaching to this moment. And of course, for us and Egypt, this is something that we are a stakeholder in that conflict, that we have to do it and we have to help and to support. But we have seen the steps that's been taken recently from the U.S. has yielded to this moment.
It's Qatar's Prime Minister speaking to me there at that news conference. Well, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office has tonight issued a statement thanking President-elect Trump and President Biden over the hostage deal. Our U.S. correspondent Mark Stone is in Washington for us. And Mark, big questions, I guess, around, and I put that to the Qatari Prime Minister, who takes credit for this? Because what we're hearing in the region is that the last month has been critical, has been crucial. The incoming Trump administration really pushing to get this over the line.
Yeah, an unpredictable man Trump is, and I think that fact can't be understated. I think it focused minds right across the region. What did he mean when he said all hell would break loose if a deal was not done by the time he was president, and he will be president on Monday? Was it a bluff? Was it an empty threat? Maybe, but maybe not. That's Trump, and I think that was one key part of it. I think it's also the case, clearly, that the unprecedented cooperation between the outgoing administration and the incoming administration on this single issue, the fact that both envoys for Biden and for Trump were together working hand in glove in Qatar, as the Qatari Prime Minister said there, that was really, really important. Both sides, Trump and Biden, are trying to claim total credit for this. Of course, it's much, much more nuanced than that. But I think it is also fair to say tonight that this deal would not have happened now, would not have happened at this point, if Donald Trump was not about to enter the White House. Benjamin Netanyahu needs to dance to Trump's tune. He knows that. He knows that he needs Trump if he wants to get things like the Abraham Accords, normalization with Saudi Arabia to happen. He will need Trump to do that. He didn't need Biden. He knew that he could walk all over Biden's red lines over the past 18 months, and so he did. Trump is different, and I think that's important. And you mentioned that statement by Netanyahu. It's really striking. 5 paragraphs, 4 of them are all about Trump. All about thanking Trump for what he did. He says he spoke to Trump and then he spoke to Biden. And it's just at the very end, the statement says Prime Minister Netanyahu then spoke with US President Joe Biden and thanked him for his help in promoting the hostage deal. That was it. So I think certainly the presence of incoming President Donald Trump had an impact on this without any shadow of a doubt.
Mark, thank you so much for all of your reporting there. Well, tonight's news is understandably being welcomed on the streets of Gaza and beyond. But for so many, it is too little too late. According to the Health Ministry in Gaza, more than 46,500 Palestinians have been killed since the conflict began on October the 7th, 2023. Among them, 6-year-old Hind Rajab, who was recorded begging rescuers to save her after an airstrike in Gaza City in January 2024. She was found dead with 5 of her relatives and 2 ambulance workers who went to save her. Sabrine Judah, a premature baby rescued from the womb after her mother was killed in an airstrike in the southern Gazan city of Rafah in April last year. She died in hospital 2 days later. And in October last year, 19-year-old Shaban al-Dalu was burned to death in a tent in a strike on the Al-Aqsa hospital in Deir al-Balah. He was being treated for an injury he'd suffered 10 days earlier. Well, so many reasons for this deal to be welcomed. In the words of the British Foreign Secretary tonight, as a moment of hope after over a year of agony. Let's go to our political correspondent, Ali Fortescue, who's at the Foreign Office. And Ali, we did hear and get a statement from the Foreign Secretary.
Yes, that's right. Look, what's happened in the Middle East today obviously is being felt here in the UK by the many people here who have relatives in Israel and in Gaza, by, of course, the family of Emily Damari, the British-Israeli hostage who was captured on October the 7th, who they hope will be one of the first people released as part of this plan. My understanding from the UK government is that they don't yet know if that will be the case. And of course, it has massive implications for the British government in terms of foreign policy, in terms of geopolitics. What is the UK's role in all of this? We hear about the big names, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu. Where does Keir Starmer sit? What is the British role? We, of course, weren't around the negotiating table in Qatar, but I spoke to the Foreign Secretary earlier on behalf of broadcasters and was keen to ask him about the UK's role. Here's what he had to say.
This is a day of hope after 466 days of agony and pain across the Middle East and across the global community. And I welcome, particularly for those hostage families, that this deal has finally been broken, and for the agony and horrors of war and the Palestinian people in Gaza. Finally, this horror has come to an end.
Well, the Prime Minister did release a statement. He says he wants the UK to be at the forefront of efforts to secure long-lasting peace. But a word that the Foreign Secretary used a couple of times struck me. He talked about this being a fragile peace deal, and that really echoes, I think, the message that we've heard from government today, the caution that the fact of a deal is not the same as the implementation of the deal, that permanent peace is not guaranteed, and that of course matters in the Middle East and here for voters here and the Prime Minister too.
Ali, thank you so much. Well, we talked a few minutes ago about just a small fraction of the Palestinians who have lost their lives in this conflict that's gone on for 15 months. Well, for Israel, there's been the atrocity of October the 7th itself, and the ongoing knowledge that some hostages remain alive inside Gaza. Among them, the 28-year-old Emily Damari, a dual British-Israeli national who was shot and taken from an Israeli kibbutz across the border into Gaza on October the 7th. Kafir Bibas is the youngest person to be taken hostage, now just 18 months old after more than a year in captivity. He was taken along with his 5-year-old brother, Ariel, and his parents, Yarden and Shiri, when Hamas militants stormed their home. The oldest hostage in Gaza is Shlomo Mansour, who's now 86 years old. A grandfather, he survived the Farhud massacre in Iraq in 1941. Teenager Liri Albag is one of the 5 female IDF soldiers who were kidnapped. She's been the most recent Israeli hostage to appear in a Hamas-released video just 10 days ago. And 50-year-old Sachi Aidan was taken hostage when armed members of Hamas attacked his home. His eldest daughter, Mayan, was shot in front of him. I've been looking back at the events of the past 15 months.
It started on the morning of October 7th, 2023, with sounds of war that have reverberated around the region ever since. Hamas gunmen stormed into Israel, into kibbutzim and a music festival. Almost 1,200 people were killed. The response, Israel striking back from the air and on the ground inside Gaza, causing widespread devastation. Within weeks, the first small sliver of hope, a deal which saw some hostages released and Palestinian prisoners freed. An Israeli-American woman, Judith Ranan, and her teenage daughter Natalie, the first to regain their freedom. The plight of the hostages and the appeals of their families still central to the Israeli debate as the country marked the attacks a year on. In Gaza, there was no respite in 15 months of relentless war. More than 45,000 killed as a result of Israel's bombardment, buildings and towns destroyed, the health system near total collapse. Among those dead, the man Israel held responsible for being the architect of the October 7th attacks, Yahya Sinwar, tracked down by a drone and killed. And the war widened, drawing in Iran, who launched massive strikes inside Israeli territory for the first time. Israel launched an assault on Hezbollah in Lebanon after months of exchanges of fire, triggering an audacious pager attack on their supporters across the country and killing the group's leader Hassan Nasrallah. Tonight, the greatest hope yet, in Gaza and in Israel, that history could be turning a page on this war. But as ever in this region, that hope is fragile.
Well, the past 15 months, the bloodshed and devastation that we have witnessed has been traumatic and painful for both Palestinians and the people of Israel. Many are now holding their breaths, waiting to see what happens between now and Sunday. And of course, the ceasefire hasn't actually come into force. It will come into effect on Sunday, where we will hopefully see some of the hostages released in exchange for some Palestinian prisoners as well. But we are being told by the Palestinian Civil Defense that at least 12 people have been killed in shelling in northern Gaza this evening. So the violence, the bloodshed, the conflict continues. But we are hoping that this ceasefire will kick in on Sunday and that there will be some respite for Palestinians and Israelis alike. We'll be following all the developments here on the ground from Doha and in Israel and beyond. But for now, Gillian, back to you in the studio.
Yalda, thank you. Away from the Middle East, the rate of inflation here has unexpectedly eased, down for the first time in 3 months by 0.1 percentage points to 2.5%. A small dip, but the fall was unexpected, so is fueling speculation about a potential interest rate cut next month. Our business and economics correspondent Paul Kelso has the details.
Finding the right economic blend is proving a challenge for the Chancellor. Her mix of tax, spending and growth initiatives have been hard for companies and markets to swallow. Even sweetened by better-than-expected inflation figures, business owners are sceptical about tax rises to come. Charlie Gilks runs 15 bars and employs nearly 500 people.
We look ahead to April when the budget starts to bite. And obviously, the NI changes have been devastating for a sector like hospitality because we're large employers of people. The costs have got to go somewhere. So this was certainly an inflationary budget, and I think there might be some celebration today that inflation hasn't gone up, but actually I think it's going to be rising again from April.
Consumer price inflation fell by 0.1 percentage points to 2.5% in the year to December, driven by falls in hotel, restaurant and airfare inflation. Underlying services inflation, a key measure for the Bank of England, also fell further than expected by more than half a point to 4.4%. There was an immediate return on the bond markets that have been pushing up the cost of UK borrowing, with the effective interest rate on government debt falling after our inflation figures at 7 a.m, and again after US core inflation also fell further than expected.
In the real world, a 0.1 percentage point decrease in inflation is negligible. You certainly wouldn't notice it off the price of your pint, and it may not last, but this still may be a significant moment. The decline in underlying inflation numbers may give the Bank of England the confidence it needs to cut interest rates at its next meeting in February.
Economically, the figures have bought the Chancellor time. Politically, questions remain.
Why should anyone trust a word he says over the businesses who are saying again and again that his budget means fewer jobs, lower growth and higher borrowing costs?
Mr. Speaker, as you know, the global economy is experiencing volatility and higher borrowing costs. That is why it was vital that we took the tough and right decisions in the budget to get our finances back in order.
Any relief is likely to be temporary, with tax increases and energy costs expected to push up prices in the spring. Consumers, never mind ministers, might want to make the most of the respite while it lasts. Paul Kelso, Sky News.
The death toll of the LA wildfires has risen to 25, with at least 24 people still missing. The National Weather Service has reinstated its highest level of warning, red warnings, across large parts of Southern California, as gusts of up to 50 miles per hour are expected. Firefighters are still battling 4 fires covering almost 40,000 acres. South Korea's impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol has been arrested 6 weeks after his failed attempt to impose martial law. Hundreds of officers used ladders to breach the presidential residence. He was brought into custody after a standoff between police and the president's security service. Mr. Yoon's lawyers had tried to persuade investigators not to execute an arrest warrant, saying the president would voluntarily appear for questioning. Linda Nolan has died at the age of 65. The Irish singer and TV personality was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2005 and later given the all clear before it returned in 2017. In a post on X, her sisters described her as a pop icon and beacon of hope, who faced incurable cancer with courage, grace and determination, inspiring millions. Mozambique's new president has officially taken office, being sworn in today against a backdrop of a contested election, protests and violence on the streets. Mozambique is in southeast Africa and has experienced escalating unrest since the vote in October. Daniel Chapo from the Frelimo party won the election by a landslide 71% of the vote. His opponent received only 20% of votes, leading him to claim the election was rigged. International election observers have noted irregularities in the process. President Chapo was sworn in earlier today at a ceremony in the capital Maputo, which was attended by heads of state, including South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa. Our Africa correspondent Yusra El Bagir sent this report from Mozambique's capital, Maputo.
He tries to fight back, hardened by months of police brutality. Taking the blows of state machinery for daring to resist. Live ammunition is used on the others. As they gather in the heart of Maputo to reject the president being sworn in.
I'm mad. I'm no longer proud to be Mozambican because I see my brothers being murdered in this country.
Rocks and bottles are flung to show their fury, not just about the disputed election, but the hundreds killed in the crackdown.
These are the calls that are getting harder and harder for Mozambique's elite to ignore. The angry voices of young men here who are asking why their calls for change are being ignored.
The country is not all right. I need you to change president, put another president, because Frelimo is not okay.
They're chanting the name of opposition leader Venancio Mondlane, who's taken on 50-year ruling party Frelimo after losing an election widely seen as rigged against their candidate, Daniel Chapo.
What do you think of Daniel Chapo being sworn in as we speak?
I think it's farcical. It's even, I don't know, I have no words to explain. It looks more like a military event with so much military, police, helicopters, tanks, all kinds of weaponry, dogs. It's a very strange environment for a sworn in. It should be a celebratory event, but on the other hand, it seems like a military dictatorship being sworn in.
In another world down the road, the ceremony continues.
This is the peak of Mozambican prestige, the pomp of a presidential inauguration. But all the lives that were lost in the lead of this are fueling the chaos that's closing in.
Another Frelimo president has now been sworn in to an adoring audience and an angry country. Yusra El Bagir, Sky News, Maputo.
Conclave led the way as nominations were announced for this year's Baftas. The papal drama, starring Ralph Fiennes, is up for 12 awards, including Best Film, Best Director and Best Actor. Our arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer has more from the red carpet.
Was it divine intervention or just the sign of a great film? Conclave, a murky thriller about the selection of a new pope, leading the field with the most nominations at this year's BAFTAs, including for Ralph Fiennes, who last won with Schindler's List. In the spirit of the film, making this confession to Sky News about the industry.
I think I do have faith that good films can be made that contribute to our cultural life, and the same as the theatre. But do we have moments of doubt that it's full of corruption, opportunism? Have we indeed ourselves participated in the paycheck film and it's not been that great? Yes.
Have you ever dreamt of a better version of yourself?
Jump scares and jazz hands dominating the nominations this year. Horror unusually well represented, with Demi Moore up for The Substance and Hugh Grant for Heretic.
You're green.
Musicals like Wicked and Amelia Perez also a dominating presence, the latter about a trans drugs kingpin, genre-busting in many respects. On paper, films like The Brutalist, nominated for 9, might equally seem like a hard sell to your average cinema-goer, all about an acclaimed Jewish architect's attempts to restart his life in America after World War II. On paper, its 3.5-hour runtime sounds about as fun as watching concrete set, but critics seem to be in agreement that it is a masterpiece. And Adrian Brody might just be the one to beat for Best Actor. Perhaps the real question being which US stars can even make it over to next month's ceremony, given the devastating wildfires in California.
I am very grateful, of course, to BAFTA for recognizing all of our work, and my heart and my thoughts and prayers are with everyone in LA. I have a lot of friends who have personally lost everything, and their home and all their belongings, and many of my colleagues. So it's not quite a celebratory moment.
This is a conclave, Aldo. It's not a war.
It is a war. Last year, the winners of the top 6 categories at the BAFTAs matched up perfectly with the Oscars. This year, much like Conclave's gossipy priests wildly speculating about the future, who this year's BAFTA winners will be is a hard one to call. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Telegraph's deputy comment editor, Annabelle Denham. Amongst the stories, we'll be discussing this take on the deal between Israel and Hamas on the front of the Times. It says ceasefire joy on both sides. We'll be discussing that and other stories when we come back. Do stay with us.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. Celebrations have been taking place after a ceasefire has been agreed in Gaza from Sunday after 15 months of deadly fighting. The rate of inflation has eased slightly, down 0.1 percentage points to 2.5%, a lower than expected figure, meaning a greater likelihood that the Bank of England may cut interest rates. The film Conclave has been nominated for 12 awards, including Best Film, Best Director and Best Actor at this year's Baftas. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Telegraph's deputy comment editor, Annabelle Denham. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Gaza ceasefire agreement is top story in The Guardian, which heralds hope for an end to what it calls a dark chapter in history. The Times says news of the agreement brought ceasefire joy on both sides of the conflict. The Financial Times offers a note of caution, pointing out that the Israeli Prime Minister has yet to confirm that a deal is done. The Express speaks to nurses about their upsetting experiences treating patients in hospital corridors in the light of a new NHS study about to be published. That story is also lead item for the Daily Mail. The Mirror calls it chaos in hospital corridors. The Metro leads with the story of a man who spent 17 years in jail, wrongly convicted of rape, but has still not received compensation, 2 years after being cleared. The Telegraph returns to a story from Tuesday and a growing row over whether Sinn Féin's Gerry Adams should be paid compensation for the time he was detained during the Northern Ireland Troubles. The Sun reports that the man convicted of the murder of schoolboy Jimmy Mizzen in 2008 has assumed a new identity on his release from prison and has recently had his rap music featured on the BBC. And on a much lighter note, The Star has a story about cream eggs. Why, you may ask? Well, we're joined tonight by Kevin Maguire and Annabelle Denham. We're not going to be looking at that story. We're starting with much more serious matters. In the front page of The Times, pictured there, one scene in Gaza, on the left, the scene on the right, the scene in Tel Aviv. This is the ceasefire joy on both sides, The Times is calling it, Kevin.
Yeah, it's a lead story in 3 papers, and they have those pictures, Gaza and Tel Aviv. And the relief and the joy it's palpable, isn't it, after 15 months in which it started with the Hamas pogrom, 1,200 Israelis killed, 251 taken prisoner, and then the overwhelming force, by Israel, which has led to accusations of war crimes on both parts. The Hamas health ministry puts a death toll at 46,000. The Times say 10 to 15,000 of those were Hamas fighters. Well, that would mean 30,000 plus weren't Palestinians, many of them women and children. The Lancet thinks the death had research recently showing the death toll, or putting the death toll estimated at much higher. So you've got to hope this sticks, and then it's what happens after that. But of course, the hostage release deal is very complex in 3 phases, the third phase being the bodies of those who are dead. But there are prisoner swaps and so on. You just got to consider, and all the traumas, and we see the traumas of the Palestinians, kids, adults who have suffered this bombardment for 15 months, but you've got to consider the traumas of the hostages too, hidden and never found, given Israel really threw resources into this war and people, but they didn't find them. I know there are lots of tunnels, but you would have thought they would have found more. And in fact, the biggest freeing of hostages was the previous ceasefire. It hasn't been search and discover and rescue. It was the previous ceasefire, and you hope in it all the Palestinians can rebuild, and you hope the families will get their loved ones back. But some are going to be, I'm afraid, disappointed. They're going to find out they're dead, unfortunately.
Well, it's the agony of the torture of the hostages, of course, who were,
horrible.
Terrible though it is to say, a major bargaining chip for Hamas. They would have done all they could to ensure they weren't discovered by the IDF. But it's also the agony of the relatives, the families of the hostages, some of whom will not know whether their loved ones will be returned to them. That is the absolute priority. It has always been the priority of the Israeli government, and the hope must now be that over these 3 phases
but many this evening cautiously optimistic because this ceasefire, if it goes ahead, doesn't kick in until Sunday, and already tonight we've been reporting on 12 deaths in Gaza. So the fighting continues.
No, well, I think in any conflict, when you're going to have an end, it's like the First World War was the 11th hour, the 11th day, the 11th month in 1918, and some people were still killed right up to it. But no, that issue of the Israeli government and the hostages, some people in Israel, the families, claim there wasn't a high enough priority put on in rescuing the hostages, and in fact, ceasefire could have earlier achieved that. So there is some criticism of Netanyahu, although he seems stronger at the end of this conflict than he did at the beginning after the major security breach in that Hamas pogrom.
I mean, certainly I think that the relatives of the hostages were a very powerful voice in Israeli society and put enormous pressure on the Israeli government and on Netanyahu. Now, perhaps not as much pressure as Donald Trump will claim, at least, that he put on the Israeli government, on Netanyahu, to agree to this ceasefire.
Donald Trump saying this epic ceasefire agreement could have only happened as a result of our historic victory in November, as it signalled the entire world. We've lost the end of that sentence, but basically Donald Trump claiming the praise for reaching this ceasefire. But a cautionary note with the FT, because Netanyahu hasn't actually said it's a done deal as yet. He has come out this evening and acknowledged what President Trump has said, but hasn't said that this is a done deal.
No, well, he's playing hard. In some ways, that's understandable. Although I think given everything that's went, there's going to be a day of reckoning. I don't think history will judge him well. It won't judge Hamas well. It will not judge Netanyahu well. But I can't see him going back on this. But there is a battle on who emerges as the victor here. And Netanyahu promised to wipe out Hamas. I suspect that has not been achieved because fighting is continuing. It was said from the start, you will not be able to do that. You are going to risk recruiting new fighters for them, and some people will see Hamas still standing as a victory in itself, or the bloodshed on both sides. That those 1,200 Israelis killed at the beginning, hundreds of Israeli troops killed in Gaza, true, and then that 46,000 figure, if it's accurate, and 10 to 15,000, if that's accurate, were Hamas fighters. That's still 30,000 plus civilians killed, and then there's what comes next. When it's just rubble, most of Gaza now.
Glass and rubble. No, this doesn't feel like a moment for jubilation, at least not yet. The IDF has not achieved, as far as we can tell, its objectives in Gaza. There was, as you say, the terrible cost of any war, which is the loss of innocent civilian lives, and, the destruction across Gaza. And I think the fear as well, that this could in some ways be encouragement for further terrorism if it's perceived that Hamas has won in this conflict, or at least secured some gains, then what sort of message does that send to others? And I think the other point is just the rise in anti-Semitism across the globe, because there was some very stark data out just today on millions of people, even in the UK, who are openly admitting to having anti-Semitic thoughts, but it's across the globe, as I say, and there's longer-lasting problems.
And Islamophobia rising too. There's been more of that in Britain.
Increasing.
And you see, the anti-Semitism in Britain, Islamophobia, and that polarisation is horrific.
We read that the Israeli government is still to vote on the deal. Perhaps that might be the reason for Benjamin Netanyahu's reticence in terms of coming forth to say the deal has been done. How likely do you think that it will be voted through? Because there is that far-right element in the Knesset, isn't there?
In truth, I don't really know, but I would have thought if you go this far and you're holding out the prospect of the hostages, some of the hostages returning to their families, it would be very hard if you are the Israeli cabinet to go back on them.
I think there's also the Trump question, isn't there? I mean, sure, he's a freewheeling narcissist who's going to take credit for something that involved a lot of painstaking work from Joe Biden and the Democrat administration. So it'd be very difficult, I think, for Netanyahu now to perform what, at least from the outside, is going to look like a U-turn, not proceed with the agreement. But the second question is, how long will the ceasefire last? Because the previous time, it was about 8 days. And we have to hope that this one will indeed hold. But certainly there will be that pressure, with the inauguration of Donald Trump next week.
Yes, indeed. Annabelle and Kevin, thank you very much for the moment. Coming up, NHS hospital staff have been speaking to newspapers from across the political spectrum about their distress at having to treat patients in corridors. We'll be discussing that next.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
President for a second time.
That reason being to save our country, he said.
A remarkable moment, isn't it?
Another chance, another 4 years. The question is, what does he do with those 4 years?
Watch the inauguration of Donald Trump as he becomes president for the second time.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
The full story, first on Sky News.
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get back!
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. How are you feeling?
I am angry. It is an anti-woman agenda.
Sky News, get the full story first. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Can you beat Donald Trump, Governor? President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Are you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down.
As them say, our God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. Free, wherever you get your news.
Excited.
I've had severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page
and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big-picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive. Welcome back. You are watching the press preview, still with me, Kevin Maguire and Annabelle Denham. Let's have a look at this rather shocking story, I might say, in several of the papers, and it's about the state of the NHS. Some reports saying it's like a horror scene in a movie, patients being treated in corridors. Some reports saying they've been treated in car parks. It just sounds like a complete nightmare. And this is a report that's due out from
Royal College of Nursing.
Yeah, the Nurses Union.
Tomorrow's a day too for the for health editors, because 3 papers, the Mirror, Mail and Express, all splash on this, and many papers are splashing on the ceasefire in Gaza, Israel. But there's been many reports out with the figures and the number of people being left in corridors, and you've had anecdotal cases, isolated cases, but this is all brought together by the Royal College of Nursing, because they represent many of the people who are having to treat patients and cope in corridors. It is absolutely horrific.
I mean, the amount of dead patients are lying undiscovered for hours in A&E because staff are too overstretched to notice.
And it is. We spend a lot of money on health. We're one of the world's bigger economies. For this to be happening is terrible. And each individual case will be awful. You go to hospital, you're not well, you need treatment, and you're parked on a trolley in a corridor and not getting the care you deserve, and people will suffer and die as a result, and that's what's happening. And the Royal College of Nursing is right with this report to actually get it out there, because you'll get action.
It is shocking.
It's absolutely horrifying. This is a healthcare service that costs £160 billion every year, and you just wonder where the money is going and why is it not being diverted towards where it's most needed. And the system, as Wes Streeting has said, does need desperately reform, and perhaps it's those who are trapped within it. You know, it's the staff, the doctors and the nurses who, they're having to treat as many as 40 patients at once in a single corridor. The conditions have been terrible for them for so many years, and I wonder whether it'll actually be the staff who push the government into finally doing what's necessary so that we can actually have a healthcare system that's fit for purpose.
Yeah, Labour have inherited this, but it's their problem now. They've got to sort it. They have to have a plan. There's extra cash going from the budget, very controversial. The employers' national insurance increase, but it's not just filling the black hole, however big that is, but it is also going to invest extra $25 billion in the NHS, and you want scandals like this to end from that spending.
Just time to go to the Times and the story in Bafta. Despite the Academy's 50-50 long list, just one female filmmaker has made the final cut. Questions being raised as to whether they have to address this imbalance.
Yes, that's right. And this comes round every now and then, doesn't it? This idea that because it doesn't look like there's diversity or sufficient diversity in a long list, that the organisation in charge should intervene in order to put forward groups from certain minorities. In this instance, it's female filmmakers. But actually, if you look at the data, around 23% of directors are female. And here it says that of the 235 films entered, 25% of the directors are women. So perhaps it's representative at this level, but what we really need to see are more women perhaps entering the film industry at the lower level and upskilling, and, in time, it will indeed be 50-50, or perhaps being a director is simply more attractive to a man than a woman. That's all right too.
We have run out of time, but thank you very much. We shall get more input from you, Kevin, in the next hour. Let's take a look at the weather now. But it'll be mild and quite settled all week, with overnight fog and variable, often large amounts of cloud. England's southeastern quadrant will have a mild, rather dull and locally drizzly start tomorrow, but it'll be colder elsewhere, if brighter, with frost or ground frost possible. There'll be some dense fog in places too, mainly over England and Wales. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, celebrations as a ceasefire deal is reached in Gaza after 15 months of deadly fighting.